Hey everyone, Ian, aka Collector Emitter here. This is the YouTube version of my podcast that is typically on my Patreon. And so what I do is when I have a guest like Wooly from Champion Leccy for this episode, I post it 2 weeks delayed on YouTube so everyone can hear it. But if you want to hear the episodes when they initially come out, the first Friday of every month, you can support my Patreon. You can get the podcast for as little as $1 a month, and it really helps me keep the channel going, everything like that. But yeah, that's it. I'm going to let you just get into the episode. I hope you enjoy. Please leave a comment. If you do, let me know if you'd like to hear me talk with anyone else in the pedal community. I'm, really enjoying making this podcast and trying to make, new connections and share a lot of different conversations. So really hope you enjoy. This is a great conversation with Wooly. We got into a lot of different stuff, and there's actually a bonus episode now if you want more. That's live on my Patreon. You can get it in your podcast app, like I said, for that $1 a month if you'd like. Never any pressure. I'll never put any demos or anything, any of the main stuff behind that paywall. But yeah, if you want a little bit extra, you want to support me a little bit, it goes a long way. And the conversation with Wooly was really fascinating in that bonus episode. We talked about a lot of cool stuff about how we as humans interact with art, how we engage with things, and all those like invisible little decisions that remind ourselves that humans are on the other side of a song and that we're all of our brains are different but connected in some similar ways. And it got a little heady, but it was fun, and lots of great awe-inspiring ways of looking at music and at gear and at the world. So that's if you want the bonus episode, but here is the main conversation with Wooly from Champion Leccy. Thanks. Hey everyone, and welcome to the May episode of the Collector Emitter Patreon podcast. And it's perfect timing because I'm really excited to have my good friend Wooly from Champion Leccy here to talk about pedals and his design process and everything. And it's perfect timing because my most recent video was of his new pedal, the Dunch, which releases today. So you can actually get it today. But we're just going to talk about, pedals and a little bit about the Dunch, a little bit about some other things. Thank you so much for doing this, Wooly.
And thank you for having me. And thank you very much for the great demo. It's great work every time.
I always love demoing your pedals because it's never that. Sometimes when you look at a pedal and the labels are, words that don't like exactly translate to something, of like they're not literal of what the knob is controlling. It's like, okay, I need to learn these, but for some reason with your pedals, it's like, okay, let me take a second to learn what hip ass means and what Clark means. And at first it seems so bizarre. And then when I actually play for 10 minutes, like, oh, I get it. I think I could use Clark in a sentence. It's all good now. And so it's like, there's like a rhyme and reason there. And it's just like, oh, I gotta like get through that first layer and then I'm good. And it's like opening up a present. It's like, oh yeah, I learned something.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think about. Like probably too much, a lot because I know a lot of people online are like, just call it gain or just call it level or stuff like that. And sometimes I'll just use the word if that's exactly what it does. But
right,
with the way that I design, a lot of this stuff is like on the Swan Hunter, for example, like I called some of the control things like confluence and like fog, and it's a bit more out there, but it's because I can't have one word to describe it, because
Right.
it's actually doing more than one thing. Like when you got it dialed in like this, it'll do this thing, and when you
Yeah.
have it dialed in like that, it'll do the other thing. So it's like, well, how do I do that? And that's why on like I think it's the Evil Twin, one of my first pedals, because it was just from experimenting. I just labeled it. It was just bunch of like question marks and exclamation marks, because like, I don't know what to call it.
Right.
Like it's not a thing. Like this, it does this other noise. So just listen to the noise.
Right.
But yeah, like I include some stuff, and I try to make it as simple as possible, and I do think about the user. But a lot of the stuff becomes so interactive. Yeah, the naming kind of becomes a bit confusing, because what do you call the thing that does several things, you know?
And even when you're being completely literal, gain can mean a lot of different things. Gain can be clean gain, or how much breakup, or how much compression, depending on where the gain is. And so there's like a fine line between this makes sense with simple literal names, and it doesn't make sense, but also this makes sense with, odd abstract names, and then just things where it's like, oh, we named this knob, some just anything random, like some pedals that are like the art is referencing some movie or something, and then all the knobs, it's like, that's just, it's nonsense, not necessarily in a bad way once you get it, but it's like none of these are relating to some idea. They're just little jokes, which is, I gotta take longer to learn that, this joke is actually level. But yeah, with your stuff, it's not for no reason. And like, once I get it, it's like, oh yeah, the fog on this Swan Hunter is the other one that I really liked, because it's like, that's so clear in a reverb and delay pedal. You could describe it as getting foggy. It's like, yeah, I get that. I don't even have to turn it to know.
Yeah, with the Swan Hunter, I think that's the only pedal that I've ever done where I had like a more nebulous concept I was trying to capture. There's a lot of the stuff, like a lot of the language, and for example, I put like some poetry on the PCB inside the pedal, and it's all related to like my hometown.
Right.
And so Swan Hunters was a shipbuilding facility, that used to be a very big part of where I'm from. And I wanted to capture this idea of like broken down industry, because it was on the Tyne River, and just like these ghosts on the Tyne, and just like this haunting kind of sound of like where industry used to be. And so with fog, because like it's kind of like, oh, what's the word? I mean, it's fog, you know what fog like.
Right. Yeah.
But the way it hangs, it makes the reverb really just hang, and it's really distinct. And I thought, well, like that's the sound of fog. Like for me, that's what it is.
Right. Yeah. So I know a lot of the names like Dunch and Champion Leccy. They come from your hometown's dialect. But I never had really thought of it this way until hearing you just say that. Do you? Is it partially that you think in these terms, and so it's easy to describe a sound with that word, or is it more, or maybe a mix of both? But is it more that you want to kind of reference and have this piece of your history in this physical form?
I mean, it's probably a mix of everything, but there is a lot of kind of nostalgia, or like homesickness, in a way that like it's kind of remembering where I am from, and just kind of holding on to that in some regard. Because I think like as people, that is important. I mean, in America, obviously you have people who are American and they have heritages from all across the world.
Right.
And they still hold on to some bit, even though they are several generations removed. And, that idea, I think wherever you are from, still, as a human, your link all the way back through the past is important. And so, like, even though I am not there, I think, like, I still find that reminding myself of that and including that is something that is unique about me, like it is unique about every person, like where they're from, and kind of holding on to that in some regard. But then there are certain words where, I'm just like, oh, that's such like a great word. I mean, there's lots of words that I can't use in pedals because they just don't translate. But
Right.
the dunch, I did think of that when I did the bloody get, and I changed one of the gain stages, and it just got so like dirty and loud, and it just made me think of the word dunch.
Right.
The word dunch is like a collision, like a car crash.
Okay.
There was I'm pretty sure there was an advert that said like different dunches, which means don't like crash into me, I guess, for like some car insurance or something going back a long time. It just made me think of that and that sound, and I was like, yeah, that's the right word. That's the word for this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even because I feel like when I was a kid, like in elementary school, playing outside with my friends, that was just the sound that we made for, like, if you wanted to write down the sound of something exploding or something like that, it was like dunch or douche, And so when I first saw that, even though it's like, I don't know what this word is, like it at least makes sense. And especially when you label it red and it's like, okay, it's like a warning light. If you hit this, it will explode. So, the main thing I had mentioned before we started recording to talk about was kind of the difference in your approach or your philosophy with making dirt pedals and with making your modulation and the Swan Hunter, which is kind of a bit of everything, reverb, delay, modulation. But I feel like you are, a lot of builders get really good in one area and then will add in like electronic audio experiments. John Snyder's this master at dirt pedals, but then he will release a reverb or a delay. And that's kind of, it's not like it's an afterthought or worse, but it's, clearly the focus is in one area. And for you, it's like sometimes I go back and forth and I think like, oh yeah, I'm just thinking about this half of you. And then I remember the other half. It's like, oh, but that, you've made like so many of the other kind, it's like, they're like kind of equally like standing separately. So I was curious kind of how you go into the two and make them kind of unique but connected.
Yeah, I think so. There's a few things that are kind of overarching, I guess, over everything. But also in terms of when I'm doing pedals that are totally different, like, something like the Woozy, which is modulation versus something that's purely a dirt, is, I think, in my head, there's like a couple of characters, if you will, like a couple of ways of doing things. Like I have, like the art style, even the art style that I do for Champion Leccy isn't the natural way that I draw. It just kind of like came out, and then I kind of like evolved these characters. But I do have a couple of other like styles that I draw in. And when it comes to music, it's kind of the same. So when I came to America, the first pedals I did were like a bunch of dirt pedals, and I was doing a lot of like heavier music, and I loved fuzz. I used to play that kind of stuff all the time, just really heavy, big wall of fuzz and stuff. So I have a lot of experience with that from just playing and playing bands and gigging and stuff. And so I think that I have a decent enough ear for that. And then with a lot of the modulation and the other stuff, my brain will kind of go, oh, what if you just did this? Or what if you put this in parallel with this, or what if this was happening when this wasn't happening, or, something like that. And I'll have a concept that I just want to find out what that thing is like. And then I'll start like breadboarding or throwing some ideas together, putting something on a PCB. And a lot of it's just kind of the exploration. And I have a similar thing with music as well, where a lot of the stuff that I write that I end up liking that I think is quite interesting will be something that I either didn't mean to play. I just messed up and I was like, oh, this is much better.
Right.
This is so much more complex. So that note really works there. Or it'll just be like, sometimes, I don't know whether you get this, but when I haven't played guitar for a while, I'll pick up the guitar and sometimes the first thing that I play is just great.
Yeah.
After playing for like, days and days and days of just going, oh, nothing's working. And then you stop for a bit and then you pick the guitar up and it's like, oh, wow. Like, I like this.
Yeah.
And sometimes that happens with ideas. Like, it'll just go, boop, and it's just a matter of like playing with a lot of that stuff. And so with like going back, actually the Woozy, what I wanted to do was something that I would never be able to do. And it just kind of ended up becoming the thing that it was. I wanted to have something that I would only be able to do with like DSP, which is something that I haven't explored yet. Right. But I like the idea of like, if you say hit the string very gently, then it'll play the note exactly as is. But the harder you hit the string, the more it'll go out of tune.
Yeah.
And that was the first idea that I had for the Woozy. And then I was like, how would I do that? I was like, I have no idea. This was many, many years ago before I really knew how to do anything. And I just slowly kept on like poking at this idea. And then I found like the PT2399, the lo-fi delay chip, which, just like pitch, chorusy stuff. And I started playing with that. And that was a bunch of fun. But it wouldn't do the thing that I wanted it to do. And then I found that the great LFO that I've been using and everything. And then it became its own thing. But it was just a lot of like, oh, what if I do this? What if I throw this in there? So yeah, a lot of the modulation and that kind of stuff is a bit more just curiosity.
Right.
And then a lot of the dirt is just like, I like these kind of sounds.
Yeah.
I know like, certain textures and things that I'll quite like and I'll want to use in some way. Sometimes, it's just a few. Like the gate on the Dunch was kind of an accident. I wasn't meaning to put a gate in there. I was messing around with some diodes and I was like, what if I just do it like this? I just rewired it one way and I was like, oh yeah, of course it's going to gate it like that. But I wasn't thinking logically like, oh, if I do this thing, it will do that. If I spent 2 minutes, I could have just worked that out. But I didn't. I just wired it up and I said, oh yeah, oh actually that works pretty well. And then tweaked it a bit more and got it to just where I wanted it. But most of the time it's it'll be from playing around with certain sounds where I just try and kind of sculpt them more to a thing that I want. And usually that is more open, kind of bigger, fuzzier tones.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's almost like they're both the same, like intuitive exploration, happy accidents, but because they're different, using different, based on, different core fundamental things, the happy accidents go in different directions. And so they feel similar because they're, all your, just curiosity. What if I try this? But, in completely different ways. And yeah, that's, it's almost more, I don't know why I thought it would be like, oh, I like to do this thing specifically with modulation and this thing specifically with dirt, and that's how I've ended up with this. But it's just this thing of accidents or luck in any, like, whatever parts you change surrounding the luck can lead you to different things. Like you're saying with guitar, I don't know if I've ever said this, publicly to everyone. But I actually, for the most part, only play guitar when I'm filming demos now. And I'll play a little bit here and there if I pick it up and feel like playing, but that's because that's when I get the best ideas, and so I want to save them for, right when I'm in it and I'm set up and I'm ready to film. Because if I get the idea and then try to recreate it later, it's just this thing of like, I'm trying to like recreate luck, and it's just so difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, because recreating luck is such an incredible amount of work to get it back to that place. It takes
Right?
so long. It's just impossible.
It's like like doing 1,000 times the amount of work to get to something that was no effort because it was just your intuition.
Yeah. That's something that, like, in terms of music, that's something that I think about a lot with, like Nirvana, because I'm that generation watching them, and it just looks all messy and stuff. But if you try and play like that, it's
Right?
impossible. Everything is nothing comes out right, because they practice so much to get it so that it can look like, oh, we're just swinging stuff about, but they were so on it because they practiced all the time.
Right?
And to make something look effortless, it has to be really, like, a lot of effort has to go into it.
Yeah. And it almost kind of works in the other direction because a little known fact, but you and I actually were briefly in a band together, and we would get together and just kind of jam on ideas. It was kind of at that point all the intuition and figuring out what we wanted to do. But I was trying really hard to play like Ian Williams from Battles, and
Right.
I would like study how he played and plan out all these things, and then at some point I it was either like watching a video or an interview with him or something. But I realized he's trying so much less than me because, it's not that he's putting in no effort, but there's a degree of like, that's the luck. Like that's how his brain works. And I'm trying to
Yeah.
recreate someone else's just natural ideas. And, it's kind of like pulling me way out of, for a while, I felt like my style that I naturally play in is too simple because I can do it all the time. And so I would try to learn how to do everything else. And eventually someone said to me, you hear yourself play this all the time, but whenever anybody else hears you, it's different because they're not hearing anybody else play like that. And I was like, oh my, wow, that's crazy. Like it just totally
Yeah.
shifted how I think about music entirely.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that I love about music. I've got to say that one thing with me, like pedals and music, is that composition for me is like this common theme that runs through both. I love like breaking things down into parts and assembling these parts in different ways and trying things, in just these slightly different configurations. And there's just an endless amount. It's just like
Right.
so much that can be done. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people online, on forums and social media and stuff, they say like, oh, you should have less gear and you should, have limitations because it's easier. And I think, whatever works for you. But,
Yeah.
kind of, I have a lot of gear, but when I'm like playing with a band, I settle on, I'll take my time finding it, but I settle on a pedal board. And if I'm putting in a new pedal, it has to be a reverb replacing the reverb, because otherwise it's like I could go, because I love the details and the nitpicking and, just like having fun tinkering. I could do it forever, but to actually do something, it's like, okay, let me stick with, I play in one tuning, I play with one signal chain, and then that way it makes everything in that and that band cohesive. That's kind of my way around it. But yeah, I think we're similar in that way. I could tinker forever.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that's the thing, like with my pedal board for my band, it's really simple. And I just went back to like standard tuning of clean Fender amp, well, Fender style amp. And then I've just got like a noise on. It's the pedal boost, like a noise on pedal. And then I've just got like chorus, dirt, delay, and reverb, and that's all I have. And people are kind of like, oh, I wasn't expecting that because of
Right.
the stuff that I build. It's like, no, I have great fun like messing around with these circuits, but
Yeah.
for the time being, the music that I'm doing, I'm not using that. I mean, I have a bunch of pedals and gear that I love to own and to whenever I can mess around with. I've had like a busy time recently, and I've been ill like twice just this year. Every time I've got a pile of pedals that I haven't played.
Right.
I've been like
Yeah.
6 months, and I've been like dying to get to them. And I think that like once the dungeon's been released and I've got all those orders shipped, I think I should have time to go and play with them. I've got some really good pedals, and then I'm really excited about it. But it's not happened 3 times now.
Right.
So I keep on like something happens and I get ill, fall behind and say, oh no, I'm gonna get it. So yeah, but people, I've seen those people on the internet like, oh, you just need to get straight into the amp and then learn how to play your instrument. It's like, it's not that simple.
Right.
Nothing is ever that simple. Like that's great if that works for you, but the kind of people who are saying that are probably just playing like the same 3 chords and be like, oh yeah. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Something that's, at least within like an established style. So you have a starting point, but, it's like for me, what got me into pedals and then what I've kind of come full circle on how I use them is that's, for me to find that inspiration and all the happy accidents. And then when I actually want to do something, now I can simplify and take all that I've learned. And it's like, okay, I'm prepared for this moment to have something simple because I've had all the time to tinker and come up with these things where it's like, oh, if I set the chorus this way, I can do this thing. And then that's just a trick I can pull out when, working on a song, and it doesn't have to always, it's like, I guess it's kind of trying to recreate the inspiration, but it's just like, I at least try to like keep a mental note. Although now it's more, I try to actually take a real note because I've learned to forget the things.
Yeah. I think part of it that you can forget and is absolutely fine is thinking about it is learning your craft.
Right.
And just everything that like, oh yeah, I suppose like, so you've got the parallel with me of like the composition within music and pedals, but also in crafting sound, like sound sculpture for everything that means, like, like mixing, mastering, just paying attention to how instruments fit in a band and stuff like that. And all of that comes from experimenting with different setups, different pedals, like how to use your instrument, just all that stuff, like how frequency works, even if you don't know the theory and you can't say like, oh, that's like 1 kilohertz or whatever,
right,
just by hearing it, just knowing like intuitively all that stuff. I think that's kind of all part of the same thing. I think just being like, oh, you just need to learn to play your instrument is saying the same thing as, use different bits of gear, try different things, like tune your ear, listen to music. It all helps. It's all part of the same thing.
Yeah. I always say that like practicing, sound design and what sounds you can make is the exact same as practicing your scales or, anything having to do with more standard practice because, you might then, a band like you had brought up Nirvana, their music is, it can be complex, chord progressions and stuff, but sometimes it's really simple, but it's simple in the way that one instrument is doing something, but then all the other instruments have to interact with that. And it's too boring if it's just like everyone's playing, the bassist is playing the root note, the guitarist is playing power chords, and the drummer is just copying the rhythm of the strumming pattern. And it's like, oh, there's not enough to grab me there. But then if you all play different things, that's, going to scare someone off. And so it's like hearing, like, it's the reason why I've been trying to learn how to play bass, but I don't think I'll ever call myself a bassist because I just can't hear how bass relates to guitar. I can't hear someone else play a guitar part and think, oh yeah, I could play this bass part.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I gotta say, I think bass players are very highly underrated, and they get a lot of stick. And it's a very difficult thing to do. So take care of your bass players out there, the good people.
Yeah, and I mean, bass players and drummers always ignored and always the most important part of a band.
Yeah, I always think of the drummer as the what's the title? The conductor. The drummer is essentially the conductor when you're playing. Yeah, it's very important. Because that's the thing. Like, if a guitar drops out when you're playing, people carry on, and it's just like, oh, just sort out the cabling here, and then they come back. But if the drums stop, everything stops.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah.
Yeah, my one current band we have, our drummer actually plays a drum machine.
All right.
And then we have these sections where we want to cut out. I mean, it's mainly in like an outro or something, but the drums cut out. And then it's like, oh, we don't like, there's no way for, if you have a drum kit, that drummer can just quietly play the hi-hat or something. And we have no way of doing that to keep time. And so it's totally changed the way that we have to write a song where that part with no drums can essentially only be the outro, because otherwise it's, or the drums have to be doing something it can't be quiet in the same way because it's all samples. And so it has to be like really high passed so you can hear it, but it's like thinner. And it really like made me, I mean, I love playing in this band and like this setup, but it made me appreciate just how much an actual person behind the drum kit can do to keep things going and adapting to slowing down and speeding up, which makes songs feel so much more natural. But it's like a separate instrument trying to recreate that with a drum machine, because if you approach it the same way, it's like the uncanny valley. It just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing with, I suppose, all music. Because you've got to take the thing that you're doing, the instrument that you're doing, or the pedal you're playing, whatever it is, and find what it is that does and do that.
Right.
If you go in thinking like this is this when it's not, like it's not going to do the thing you want. You've got to like just work around, and you can get great results with pretty much any piece of gear.
Yeah.
You can do like something that's good as long as you lean into like what it is.
Yeah, I think I have people ask me a lot if a pedal is something that you have to play to, as opposed to it just working with you. And I mean, a lot of pedals are that way, but I think some people think of that as a negative. But for me, it's a positive because that's specific about where I can use it. So it takes some of the guesswork out. It's like, oh, I can use this if I'm playing like this, and there's room in the mix for this. And so it kind of half opens up the door. And so I've never really considered that a negative thing. But I know some people want the basics and to not, get too in the way. And so, Yeah, like you're saying, maybe that's just finding the things meant for what you're doing, not necessarily the things that are easy to play with.
Yeah. And like as a pedal designer, like there's only so much you can do to guess what people might want.
Right.
And, you know, when you're making, well, as soon as you're making something sound a certain way, it sounds that way. You know? So like one of the things that I've always done since the Fat Get, which was like pretty full on oscillating crazy fuzz, was to make it usable all the way up to the point of crazy,
Yeah.
so that you've got like as much like breadth and depth and flexibility in there to try and, you know, to know just like this is what you're doing, you know, like so people have got enough to kind of personalize the sounds, but you can't do that for everyone. There's no pedal that is for everyone.
Right. Yeah. That's why, yeah, I've always kind of disliked the idea of a negative review of a pedal because
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's how you play and how everything what you're trying to fit it in with. Even I mean, I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing, but it's something I certainly could never do. And I actually hope to get someone on a future episode of this to talk about this idea. But there's a lot of demos now where they do a whole song with the pedal on each part. And to me, the idea of using a pedal on everything, the same pedal on everything, is kind of scary because now it's, oh, I'm kind of funneling everything into the same frequency range, and then only have maybe the EQ of my amp or the EQ of the pedal to differentiate parts. And so, kind of even that simple of an idea kind of scares me. And
Yeah, I couldn't do that. Yeah.
yeah, I have some music I've been working on my own, outside of my bands, and I have a pedal board that's all dirt pedals, just different variations on fuzz, and all the tones on the demo versions I've made are just combinations of two different ones. So that way it's like, okay, I don't have to have, I used to just do a pile on my desk. I'm going to try and get out an idea. It's like, okay, between every take, switch pedals so that they're all slightly different. It's like, okay, this system works because if I want it to be clean, I've got these two low gain things, these two fuzzes, this really high gain, like super saturated fuzz. And I can combine them in any way that can create different unique things, but they're focused on different, frequency points.
Yeah, that's one thing that I actually consciously did with the Dunch was because you've got the B and the T, which is bass, treble, or bottom, top, depending on how you want to think about it. Is I made them shelves with 3 different frequency corners because I wanted to make a pedal that would help you fit in the mix.
Right.
So you can find your place, and if you just need to cut a bit, and because sometimes if you've just got one fixed frequency, it's like that's kind of doing it. But I wanted to add a little bit more flexibility in there. But I was thinking of like these shelves in terms of mixing yourself within a band.
Yeah. I mean that when I was filming my demo, I was like, okay, this is a big feature and a good, when you're in the band context, it makes so much sense. So I want to show it instead of just mentioning it in passing, but I don't know how I'm going to do that. And when I actually, tried to create those settings before filming, I was like, oh, wait, this is actually the easiest thing to show because we all know what a bass knob does and what a treble knob does. But then when you have the exact same settings and you just switch 2 toggles and it's a completely different sound, oh, okay. Like that's exactly how I can use that to find the right thing. And and not in, I get, it's funny, people often think I want and like more complex pedals, but I want things to be as simple as possible. I love,
Yeah.
I love, it being boiled down to just one thing, because then I can remember the one thing for every pedal. And so, I'd much rather this than like a graphic EQ where I can have full control and create different sounds. But, it's like, it's, that little bit extra effort to, oh,
Yeah.
do I want to get into this specific frequency? Should I just make a general shape?
Yeah. With yeah, when you're saying about controls, that's definitely something like in the design process that I go over and over. I remember when I was first doing the Woozy, which was the first like proper pedal that I was putting out, it went from being like a couple of knobs to at one point there's going to be like 13 knobs on there. And I was like, that's too much. Do I really need this?
Right.
And it's all the decisions that you take out of the user's hands. And you
Yeah.
have to make sure that that's well done. But yeah, like I wasn't intending it to have a gate, but then I did the gate and I was like, oh yeah. And then I remembered something from when I did the Can You Fettle boost, which became the bias album. I was like, is it worth putting this in? Like, is it going to do enough that it justifies putting an extra control in? And I decided that it was because it's on there. But it's those decisions all the time where it's like, oh, should I not?
Right. Yeah. The more I've paid attention to pedals and kind of the things that builders will post outside of what they actually have released, the more I've noticed a lot of builders will make a dirt pedal and then say, I have a deluxe version that I guess I could make, but I don't know if it's worth it. It happens all the time. And yeah, it's just because it's, oh, this is all the options that I took away from you. Yeah, I had played the breadboarded prototype of the Small Sound Big Sound No Memory years ago, and Brian from Small Sound Big Sound had said to me, like, oh yeah, this is just a delay I'm working on, if you want to check it out. And I played it and I was like, what do all these knobs do? It was like a full breadboard's worth of just for the knobs. And he was like, oh, don't worry about those. I'm only going to keep like these 4. It's like, okay. And so it's like all these things of just like finding that bias point. Okay. Each one will just have this resistor. And yeah, that I think, like, kind of, I try to remember that with everything. It's like, it's not just as easy as, oh, this kind of, if I put together these parts, it makes a pedal. It's like, oh, there's a lot of decisions to make it sound good enough to take away the decisions.
Yeah. And yeah, it gets pretty complex. So there's a few dip switches inside Dunch as well, because there's a few things where it's like, there are situations where someone might need to just tweak this thing. Like if they're using a bass, for example, they might want to just like change this small thing, or if the Dunch is too aggressive, there's like an option for a slightly less Dunchy Dunch.
Right.
All those things, because you hear people being like, oh, just if you're gonna have like options, don't put them on the inside of the pedal. And I'm like, but I've got to put it on the inside of the pedal, otherwise the pedal gets too big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and those are options that you'd only change once, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like if you're playing it and you go, there's a like, because basically it's a high pass filter, a low pass filter, and a second option for the Dunch. And hopefully, like when you sit down, you're like, oh, that's grand. But if it's not, if there's some way you're using where you're going, oh, I'm getting a bit too much top end in here, you've got like 4 combinations that you can try of cutting out top end. And you've got the same on the bottom end as well. So if you're like, oh, but there should be a bit more bottom end because I'm playing bass, you just have a couple of switches and then you're done. Yeah. So yeah, that's why those ones are on the inside, because hopefully it's just like, oh, I'm playing this instrument or I want this thing, so boop. And then you're done, and then everything else on the front does the things that you want them to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
I hope.
yeah, I guess you never know until you start getting comments. Oh, I got mine, and I wanted to change back and forth between. Can you expression control the low cutoff?
Yeah, I get. I don't get too many, but I used to get a lot of emails of like, "Oh, have you thought about doing this or like this? Or it'd be great if it did this." And it's always like, "Yeah, yeah." I did think about that. And, I don't know what to say because some of them are great ideas, and some of them are things that I've thought of, and some of them aren't. It's like it's just this like, where do I draw the line?
Yeah, right. Even me, who likes big pedals over small pedals, it's like there's a line. The pedal can only be so big.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a couple of things I'm working on at the minute, and I really have to decide, like, okay, so this is this like 1590 enclosure, like the Woozy, or is this going to be a big one? And if it's going to be a big one, like this one, it's like, is it worth those controls? Like,
right.
And it's like this kind of like, because most things fall in between, and it's just it's board space, and it's a lot to play with, and it's like. It's such a toss-up every time trying to work out like what is it that this thing does,
right?
And then how to focus in on that.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I try to think of it as like I'm happy to use a pedal that is as big as it needs to be. But once it's like, oh, I get something simple out of this. If it's big, then it's like, okay, could I do 2 pedals on my pedal board for that?
Yeah.
And I was really thankful that Alec knew what he was doing with Park Garden and Cascader. And so we didn't have to worry about that, because with the ideas, he said, this has to be this from the start. And, we could work backwards from there, because otherwise I would have said, oh, could we do this? Could we do that?
Yeah. And there's so much stuff, just, basic things like, oh, can we like change the order of these things and have a control for that? It's just so many things that are just fantastic. It's like music, there's only so many notes, but there's so much you can do with those notes.
Yeah.
And with electronics, there's only so many parts, or so many things that can do different things to create certain sounds, but there's so many ways of just messing with them and those components that it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I the first pedal I got from you was the Divi, and that it was kind of, I was pretty new into making videos and actually at that point I was new into fuzz. I hadn't really ever liked fuzz before because I'd only played a Big Muff. And so I was like, oh, yeah, this isn't for me, and didn't buy any other fuzz pedals. And so then I was like, okay, I'm making videos. I want to try everything. And I played that. It's like, wait, I've played a harmonic percolator before. Like, wait, once I connected those dots of like, this is like, if you boil it down to this like origin point, somewhat similar, but it is entirely different just from those small changes. And yeah, it's like when someone who's not into pedals, it's like, oh, but does it make a difference? It's like I can't tell you what you will hear and feel as a difference, but there's always a difference.
Yeah that circuit in particular it's just crazy because it's so simple. You can make some really significant changes with the tiniest of things like component values or different transistors and that. So yeah, Divi, like I added something unique in there. I changed the transistors and I changed like a couple of values, and yet it sounds different. And everyone else who's done one done similar things, and each one just sounds different,
right?
Has something different going on, and it's just like a couple of bits that you can change and just tweak and balance out. And
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And yeah, I mean, it's like that's where you end up with someone like me who can make a whole pedal board of just fuzz. So, well, we can wrap up the main episode, and then we can do a bonus episode as well. But the last thing I'll ask is, you kind of mentioned this at the very beginning, but I thought it was interesting enough to at least mention again, ask more concretely. But looking at the art for your pedals across the years, is it carrying on these specific themes and like the ghosts and the skeleton guy, and then in the dirt pedals you have the colorful limbs, and is it all just tied together as that's what Champion Leccy is, or are there like specific paths of Woozy is similar to Skitter and so they kind of connect?
I don't know.
That's the perfect answer.
Like, honestly, like sometimes I'll just kind of like put a pedal out and get the art together, and I'm like, where is this going? And what am I doing with these things?
Right.
And I haven't got a proper answer yet, because I feel like it should be like its own little universe.
Right.
In fact, if you see the demos from Pedalscopic Sounds, they've created a universe on my behalf.
Yeah.
with
It's amazing.
Stuff, which is great.
The Pedalscopic Sound videos that are for your pedals are the most compelling, because it's like there's actually these characters to work with instead of just creating visuals out of vaguely the art of a pedal. And so I've always kind of wondered, and like I have the shirt with the ghost stabbing itself in a circle, and and it's like sometimes it's like, to me, because I mainly only ever see the front, and I know it's your design, but I'll forget that it even ever says Champion Leccy on it, and it's like, oh, this is just my ghost shirt. That's the ghost. like the ghost is a real person, and has a whole life on its own.
Yeah. So all of that started because when I first started making pedals, because I just moved to America, I didn't know anyone or like how to do anything. Like, I didn't know anyone who did manufacturing, or had no connections.
Right.
So what I worked out was I could hand paint the pedals. So I started just hand painting like a bunch of like random stuff and crazy characters and all this stuff. And the ones that I use now are the ones that just kind of stuck. There wasn't ever like a master plan of like, oh, this is like the Leccyverse. They don't have names.
Right.
It's just, oh. But yeah, like every time when I like do a pedal, sometimes I'll look back at art. So actually the artwork for the Dunch I did as a one-off hand-painted divvy, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I was just like, I wanted, because with the Bloody Get, it had like the severed leg. And I was like, I want that again. And then I remembered this one that I did, and I was like, yeah, I'll do that. And I do have some other ideas, but I always get a bit scared that, because it is this kind of thing, it is its own style, and like, how do I develop that style, which was not intentional.
Right.
So I don't know where it's going. No idea.
Yeah. The reason I thought of this was when I was trying to explain the Dunch switch on the Dunch in the demo. I was looking back for, some info, like whatever you had written about the Bloody Get, and I found photos of the original Get with just the hand painted limbs, colorful limbs. And I was like, oh, wow. I wonder if it's an actual through line or just your style. And then you specifically said that it's not your main style. And that kind of got me thinking. But yeah, I mean, it's like so recognizable beyond even just like a logo, but it's like you said, it's like a world that these things all live in.
So one thing that I've remembered is there is actually a thread right from the beginning of Champion Leccy. When I was doodling, I had this doodle of like a bald middle-aged guy sitting on a toilet reading a newspaper. I thought it was really funny. And then I deconstructed that for the fat cat. So there's just a bare pair of legs and some underpants on it. So because I couldn't do the whole toilet graphic and I couldn't do all that,
Right.
so it's just like just some pants and some legs, and then the get, which was the small one, I just did the legs, and then
Right.
for the bloody get, I was a severed leg, and obviously the underpants have kind of stuck around as like the general logo since then. But that's where it all comes from. So maybe he'll have to make an appearance at some point.
Maybe he's the skeleton or the ghost.
Yeah, maybe he did an Elvis.
He was on the toilet for too long that he ended up dying and becoming a skeleton. And he's just been floating down the river, and that's where he met the ghosts because they're, out there in the fog singing. It's all
Perfect.
connected.
We're working it out. Yeah.
All right, now we need to get pedalscopic sounds to start doing all this, build the universe. We pitch it to a TV channel. It's going somewhere.
Wow.
Well, that's the perfect thing to end this episode on. So thank you so much for coming on and talking and, getting into some of this stuff, and then also giving us a peek behind the curtain, but also, commiserating with me about our tinkering. Made me feel seen to not be the only one stuck on the tinkering. But yeah, this was really fun.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ian. Thanks.